Today, we are hosting Professor Benjamin Silverstein, who is a senior lecturer, assistant professor, and at Hebrew University, Jerusalem. And then he's going to make a short presentation on a lecture on the North Korean daily politics between coercion and then resistance, past, present, and then future. Thanks for accepting our invitation to this project. And then the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And really a big thanks to you for organizing this event and this series. I found it very, very interesting to follow. And I'm very glad to get to give this talk here today. So I'm sure many of you already know about this, depending on who's watching. But since the 1990s famine and the beginning of marketization of the North Korean economy, the rise of farmers markets and also of private business or semi-private business. There's often been the sense that the rise of this market economy and not least the smuggling of foreign culture would lead to a sort of social revolution as the so-called Changmadan generation grew up and came of age. So their exposure to things like entrepreneurship and private economic activity, as well as foreign or mostly South Korean culture, would make them more independently minded and decrease the legitimacy of the state in their eyes as compared to their parents and especially grandparents' generation. But things were never that simple. North Korean society and its relationship to the state cannot be understood in a simple linear fashion or anything like that. Kim Jong-un has cracked down harshly on smuggling and uncontrolled foreign trade and sought to regulate market trade in a much more strongly and in a much more comprehensive way, while also strengthening the state's role in the economy. And all these social changes that we see in North Korea, I believe, should be seen as sort of negotiated between the state and the citizens, often as a sort of tug of war between the two. So while the regime can certainly increase its social and economic controls, setting stricter frames for the private economy, making it more dangerous to consume foreign culture, getting rid of these things entirely from North Korean society is just not possible, or it's very, very unlikely. With the markets, the state doesn't even seem to have any ambition of that sort, as I'll get into in a second. So today I'm very happy to get to make some brief points about this development and its implications for North Korean society. But I actually want to start with questioning one of the common baselines for this discussion, namely that North Koreans were fully, entirely dependent on and obedient to the state under the Kim Il-sung era between 1948 and 1994. Both scholars on North Korea and often North Koreans themselves sometimes refer to the decades between the 1960s and the 1990s as a period when the North Korean system, quote unquote, functioned as intended, a sort of golden age, if you will, because North Korea was much wealthier and the state could actually fund its programs and policies. So the public distribution system for food, for example, had enough to distribute the basics to the public, so that people were supposedly entirely dependent on the state. And the state control over the information environment was supposedly total. People's only cultural consumption came from what the state produced, and which is of course heavily laden with political propaganda and similar messages. Another assumption is that there was next to no disobedience in society. People were too scared of the possibility or the possible consequences to speak critically with one another about the regime and its policies. So this is the way that I argue that North Korean society between, especially in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, has tended to be seen. The thing is, things were always more complicated than that. So to try to better understand North Korean society before the famine, I interviewed approximately 40 North Korean refugees, mostly aged 50 and above, a few years back, in sort of long form interviews. So no survey research or anything like that. And I learned some fascinating things from talking to these people. So for one, contrary to the claim about the North Korean state as historically having provided entirely for its citizens everything they need, Most interviewees agreed that this was never fully the case. People, at least in the provinces outside of Pyongyang and other major cities, always had to supplement the food they were given by the state by exchanging with neighbors and friends, and sometimes borrowing food from one another. People only got a certain proportion of what they needed from the state, perhaps the most important basis in the form of rice and other cereal, but this was never entirely enough. And the same goes for culture. Several interviewees, especially those from the intelligentsia that I was fortunate enough to speak with, have recounted to me that even in the 60s and 70s, arguably when the regime's social control reached its very top, its peak, they found ways to read books that had been banned in favor of writings about the great leader only. Some kept books that had been banned and cleaned out from the library shelves they kept them in their homes. Other people borrowed them from friends who had access to banned materials through various connections. And many interviewees also told me about how they always had some friends and family, usually people very close to them, that they always trusted enough to speak critically about the government with. And despite the obvious danger of doing so, they talked about their true sentiments and feelings and thoughts about society and the regime, only with those that they really trusted, and never when they could be overheard by a third party that might report them. Now, none of this evidence is statistical. Obviously, these are impressions that I've gathered up from speaking with people who experience these things. But these are patterns of behavior that have been explained to me by so many North Koreans as to make it reasonable to question many supposed facts or many things that we supposedly know about North Korea before the famine. Disobedience and lawbreaking have undoubtedly increased from the 1990s. There's no doubting that. But these phenomena didn't entirely start there. So how should we understand the current relationship between citizens and the state? One of the most interesting things, in my opinion, about the rise of the semi-legal market economy is the potential for a sphere of its own to take shape through the markets beyond the state. Now, it's crucial to remember that the state is not absent in the private economy, far from it. Traders on the official markets, the 종합시장, pay a fee, for example, to the local government's market administration bureau. Sometimes, well, a lot of the times, there are other sorts of bribes involved that people need to pay in order to trade on the market with authorization and some level of safety. Those North Koreans have become entrepreneurs by starting companies in various forms, pretty much always do so by contracting with a state-owned enterprise to use its cover for this business activity, making the business legally and formally legitimate. And in many ways, the market system has grown in tandem with the state, not against it. But still, market actors generally have to write and uphold their own rules because there's basically no law and no institutions protecting this economic activity. So how do people create and uphold these norms, like following through on contracts and promises, for example, in the market sphere? To a large extent, market activity relies on the market actors themselves, the people involved, creating social capital, or what we tend to call social capital, through repeated exchanges and trust building amongst themselves. And this is really the only way the private or the semi-private economy can work in the absence of state laws and clear regulations. This is also an issue that I've tried to learn more about by interviewing people who have left North Korea, so-called or commonly called defectors, people who were previously involved in market trade while they were living in North Korea. And I want to suggest a few general patterns that we can see in this process. For one, people very often tend to rely on family and friendship ties in their economic dealings. So people they already trust. Something that other scholars have pointed out as well. One woman that I interviewed, just to give one example out of several, came to run a fairly successful business trading in Chinese imported clothes and North Korean sourced seafood. And she only came to this trade because she happened to get to know some Chinese traders who were coming to North Korea and sometimes stayed at her family's house in Musan in the northeast of North Korea. And she got to know them over time and got the idea to sell the clothes that they were bringing to sell on to North Korean distributors by interacting with them. So by talking to these people and getting to know them, she got the idea that eventually led to her business endeavor. So what she would do is she would take the clothes to a market in Chongjin, sell them there, and then purchase seafood from local vendors and take it back to Musa and sell it back to the same Chinese traders who would then in turn sell it in China. And this is one of many stories out there about family connections and ties formed in this context of trust leading to successful business. Another crucial factor is repeated interactions. Now, these are essential for building social capital and trust in any economy and in the North Korean economy as well. I spoke with, for example, with one woman from North Korea about this who used to sell gold to Chinese traders and to say an illegal form of trade because the state is supposed to have a full monopoly on it because it owns all the natural resources in the country. So this makes it particularly risky. And she illustrated very well the importance of repeated action and interactions for trust. She would sell her gold on credit by tossing it over a border fence into China, where it was then collected by her Chinese contacts. And they would sell the gold in China, and then only afterwards would they pay her. And only because of the known reputation of these Chinese traders as trustworthy, because they'd already been through a countless number of these interactions before, only thanks to that reputation and these repeated interactions could this sort of trade happen. And I want to stress that there are countless examples like these, and they illustrate these mechanisms of trust and reputation, a form of social capital that make the North Korean market system function. And this doesn't necessarily translate into anything like a civil society per se, but at the very least, the market sphere has become a sort of force in its own right, which the state has to take into account when making policy. Should the rules become too strict or fees or bribes become prohibitively expensive, too expensive for people to actually pay them, local governments know that people might even show open discontent or simply just trade less, which also would hurt state finances by lowering the amount of taxes and fees the local government can collect. So where does this development stand under Kim Jong-un? On the one hand, Kim has been and continues to be, despite some changes in the past couple of years, much friendlier to the market system as such in its entirety than his father, Kim Jong-il. Under Kim Jong-il, we saw repeated crackdowns and attempts to curb the market system by closing down major markets, and of course, by redenominating the currency in 2009, wiping out the savings of most market traders. Now, Kim Jong-un's record is mixed. It's not a clear story in one direction. Under the rule of Kim Jong-un, the state has expanded the scope of marketplaces condoned by the state, making their space physically larger, and things like rules and fees for market trade have become more standardized and clearer. Kim Jong-un hasn't launched, and this is very significant, I think, he has not launched any general crackdown against the markets in the same way that his father did. On the other hand, Kim Jong-un has sought to make state control over the economy stronger and more centralized. At the 8th Party Congress in early 2021, Kim made a big speech emphasizing the, quote, state's unified guidance, unquote, over the economy, highlighting especially the state's role in the service sector, which is one where marketization has reached particularly far. And this has been followed up by similar rhetoric on various occasions. There's a multitude of examples out there. as well as a general tightening of conditions for private entrepreneurs contracting with state firms, and especially in foreign trade. And this is part of a bigger story of Kim Jong-un seeking to enhance state control overall of society. He's more or less declared war on what he terms reactionary capitalist tendencies, such as consuming South Korean culture. This has been a clear pattern, in fact, under Kim Jong-un. And when we look back and try to find the roots of it, they go back at least to 2014. But it's been strongly emphasized it was strongly emphasized in late 2020 when the Supreme People's Assembly, North Korea's rubber stamp parliament, adopted a law against so-called reactionary thought. The law made it punishable by up to 2 years in a labor camp for using South Korean vocabulary and accents, and possibly death for those caught disseminating this sort of culture. And one interview study with North Korean defectors in 2017 showed that the vast majority of interviewees believed it had become significantly more dangerous under Kim Jong-un to consume foreign culture. It was always forbidden, but under Kim Jong-un, it's become much more of a risk. We don't need to look far for examples. If you go to publications like the Daily NK, they often report several times a week about people being given very excessive punishments for even small acts that suggest a cultural influence from South Korea, such as using certain words or dialects in public. So to sum up, or to round off, how can we expect this development to continue and to shape state-society relations in North Korea going forward? First, I want to emphasize, as one always should when talking about developments inside North Korea, that getting reliable information about the country, which is, it's never been easy, but it's gotten increasingly more difficult since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So all testimonies that we have should, of course, be taken with a grain of salt. Now, that said, I believe that given what we know about social and economic control in North Korean history and in the more recent past, there are a few predictions that we can make. First of all, economic control will most likely always be, as I said in the beginning, negotiated between the regimes, or a negotiation between the regime's interests and goals and the economic reality for people on the ground, rather than just a top-down policy-making process without consideration of the consequences. At least since the 2009 currency redenomination, but I would argue even before then, the regime has been wary or careful with enacting policies that are widely unpopular among the population, or to risk outright shows of discontent by the public. Another example of this is, which has garnered far less attention, is the public bonds program that was launched in April 2020, but rolled back only a few months later. Second, and relatedly, it's unlikely that the state will be able to dramatically change its relationship to the citizens or those between market actors. The state would need to replace or dramatically take control of the market system, which would be extremely challenging, not to say impossible. There's been some attempts at restarting the public distribution system of food in the early 2000s, and also over the past couple of years. And the state also does appear to have tried to monopolize trade in staple foods like grain. And of course, the state could increase its share in basic food trade, especially if it gets food and economic assistance from China and Russia. But it cannot replace the market system entirely, and it knows this very well. The simple reason is that people depend on it for such a wide range of goods, and state distribution just cannot compete. The mechanisms and the resources aren't there. Third, and finally, although the state can make it much more dangerous and risky to consume foreign culture, it's unlikely to succeed in stopping its spread entirely. It may succeed better in some environments than others, like Pyongyang with its relatively tight social control compared to the provinces. But doing so in the more remote parts of the country would take a concerted effort by the security apparatus on various levels that the state very likely lacks the capacity to pull off. This is especially true because, of course, state security agents themselves are often heavily involved in smuggling. We also know anecdotally that they, just like many other North Koreans, often consume foreign culture themselves. The number of people watching South Korean dramas and the like in North Korea may already be significantly lower than a decade ago, but there will always be people prepared to take the risk for entertainment and a glimpse of the outside world. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for giving me the time, and I'm sorry for going over by a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for your very interesting and a very systematic analysis of North Korean state society relationship last, I think, 6 decades.
6 decades in 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Yep.
I think this is really pretty. We liked it, and
Great.
yeah, I have a few questions to start.
Mhm.
My question is, you emphasize the importance of family and then friendship ties in the state society relationship, especially in a market economic system in North Korea. Can you elaborate a little bit, and then why they need this type of very high level of so-called social trust or family trust or relative trust?
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. I mean, I think the main reason is that because there is no real framework of the rule of law or protections for private property and the like, people have to contract. Yeah, exactly. Contracts. Yeah, exactly. People tend to do this kind of unprotected economic activity with people that they trust, where there is some kind of relationship there already. They know them, and I mean, this is, I didn't go into it that much in the lecture, but when I interviewed people from North Korea, it's not just family ties, also, and I think it's very often when people get started in market trade, they'll just offhandedly explain that, like, oh well, I knew this person and they knew someone else who could provide me with this. Like, there is a feedback loop, sort of. It's not like you do this with people that you don't know who might just take your money and run or something like that. These relationships between family and friends or acquaintances, they provide a level of security that the state framework just cannot provide. So I think that's why even beyond like close friendships or close family relationships, a lot of this activity tends to happen with people who know someone who knows someone, so that there's kind of a circle of sorts. Yeah,
but at the same time, if you just depend on family ties and then friend ties, and then the size of scale of business cannot be very big and large, and then but this the nature of the capitalism always tended to make this type of scale of business larger and then bigger. Then we are not gonna witness this type of larger and bigger business model in North Korea sometime pretty soon.
Yeah, no, I think that's I mean, I think there's two things to say about that. One is that there are more sort of major business operations. I frankly, I think it's hard to say how many they are and how many people who are engaged in market trade in North Korea actually manage to grow a sort of, I don't want to say empire, but grow a business that's not just gathering some gold and selling it to Chinese traders, but like importing massive amounts of like motorcycles and like big things that you require serious connections for. I mean, these operations certainly exist, and some of them are very successful. And I think that in those cases, again, I do think that a lot of people first get started through these relationships with people, family or people that they have some sort of either first degree or second degree relationship to. But then when you expand above that, then this dynamic of repeated interactions becomes very important, because reputation is a golden resource, especially in every economy, arguably, but especially in an economy like the North Korean one, or society like the North Korean one, where there's no legal state framework protecting you. So the reputation of economic actors in following through on their promises and on their commitments, that is something very important. And I would say also, Sorry for going on for a long time, but I would also say that the people that I have personally interviewed about this, they tended to be lower level market traders, so not people involved in like a big operation. Some of them did hire other people, they did employ other people to help them with their activity. And one thing I was trying to understand is why they didn't expand more. Like if they were successful in a certain type of trade, why wouldn't they expand this beyond what they were doing? And a lot of people would say that it's for them, it was just not worth the risk or the effort. They were making enough money to support themselves and their families, and they didn't really feel the need to go bigger and to make very significant amounts of money. And that's, of course, it's not true for everyone, but I do think it's true for a pretty significant segment of market actors in North Korea, because the effort and risk that's required in sort of going bigger and leveling up your business and really, becoming a real wealthy capitalist, it involves it's very, very difficult to do. So I think that and it's very risky to do, and I think that prevents a lot of people from doing it because it's just not worth it.
So they get a lot of might, if you get too rich and then you get the attention, from the state, and then that might
That
be,
too.
state
Yeah.
court in many senses can be applied to your business and your family and then your friends and then that type
Yeah.
of, so this is pretty interesting equilibrium. And then this, market, the system business world, and then incentive for the expanding their business. Of course, it's just more like your human nature, to make more money and then more profit and to get richer. But at the
Yeah.
same field, or formally or informally monitored by state apparatus, security apparatus, and then they are watching, and then sometimes might give you the warning. Then that's the limit. Don't just go too
Yeah.
far. Okay. So
Yeah, absolutely.
this is the interesting part. And then, you mentioned about, Kim Jong-un era, since 2011. And Kim Jong-un actually become a regime itself. It's a very market friendly and a more market, at least, than his father's regime, Kim Jong-il regime. But at the same time, it's try to control, the society from the cultural and then ideological perspective. And then I think this is more like become cliche type of question for every North Korea watchers. How the Kim Jong-un regime and then those the leadership say strike a balance between this friendly policy, at the same time the growing and stronger and expensive centralized state coercion. That's no. I mean, they cannot be compatible in say our economics and the political economy textbook.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right that it's. Do you agree that there is a balance being struck? Like the cliche? Do you think it's?
It's I think they are trying to find the equilibrium in the striking a balance, but I think it's they are still figuring out how to completely different elements in the very highly autocratic regime. And then
And sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to, but I think I would say, and this is something that's I think one of the bigger questions is, and I would argue that we have the answer, at least for now. Kim Jong-un might want to control the economy overall much more, and sort of make, and I think that partially this is even a good thing to create frameworks for create a transparent-ish system for market trade and having clear rules for how market administration should work and clear fees and things like that. But it's again a very boring academic answer. I think it really remains to be seen in a possible potential future.
I don't think you'll see Russian type of oligarchy in North Korea pretty soon. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for your excellent the lecture. At the same time, very interesting and stimulating Q&A session. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for a great discussion. It was really, really fun, and I hope to see you in person soon.